It started like any other day, or so I thought. When I stepped through the door that evening, I didn't expect the chaos that awaited me. The air was still, quiet, and familiar, at least for a moment. Then came the sound. A sudden slam of the front door behind me, the vibration reverberating through the hall. I froze mid-step, the grocery bag in my hand suddenly heavy. "Kimberly!" I called out, unsure why my voice came out strained. No answer. A moment later, she stumbled into view, her coat half hanging off her shoulders like an afterthought, her hair disheveled in a way that didn't suggest a bad commute but something more feral. A faint cocktail of sweat and alcohol followed her into the room, like the aftermath of a long, indulgent night. "Late meeting, huh?" I muttered, half to myself, the words bitter on my tongue. Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second before she laughed. Low, throaty, and wholly unfamiliar. It wasn't her laugh, not the one I knew. The coat slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the floor like a forgotten relic, and my heart nearly stopped. She wasn't wearing anything underneath. At first, I didn't process it, blinking as if my eyes had deceived me. But no, there she stood, shameless and exposed, her bare skin catching the glow of the kitchen light. The heat in my face wasn't from attraction or embarrassment, it was humiliation, shock, and rage bubbling just beneath the surface. Kimberly flopped onto the couch with a careless sigh, her skin brushing against the fabric like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her phone, clutched loosely in her hand, slipped free and landed on the cushion beside her with a soft thud. It buzzed once, then again, and again. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away. My chest tightened as the screen lit up repeatedly with messages. Most were too quick to catch, but one word stood out, glowing like a neon sign in the wreckage of my disbelief. Chris. The name was like a key unlocking something ugly and unrelenting in the back of my mind. For months, my gut had whispered to me, planting seeds of doubt I'd ignored. The late nights. The cryptic texts. The way she'd slip straight into the shower the moment she got home, brushing off my questions with vague excuses. And yet I had trusted her. Because that's what you do when you love someone, isn't it? But now, those whispers in my gut screamed. I moved toward the couch, every step heavy, the tension thick enough to suffocate me. Kimberly was out cold, sprawled like a mocking portrait of everything I'd tried to build with her. My hand hovered over her phone, a battle waging inside me. It wasn't snooping if the answers were calling to me, was it? Her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up once more. This time, I caught more than a name. A full sentence glowed on the screen, searing itself into my mind. "Still can't get the taste of you off my lips." Nausea clawing its way up my throat. My fingers trembled as I picked up the phone, the smooth surface cold against my palm. I swiped it open with ease. Her passcode was still the same. The inbox was flooded. Messages from Chris, each one more damning than the last. "Wish I was the one putting you to bed tonight." Attached to one of the messages was a photo. Against every screaming instinct, I tapped it. The image filled the screen, and the air left my lungs in a single shuddering gasp. It was Kimberly. Her hair was tousled, her lips slightly parted, her eyes dark with desire as she leaned against a mirror. She wasn't wearing anything in the picture, either. I set the phone down like it burned me. The room felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in around me. I could hear her soft, shallow breaths, the sound mocking me in the deafening silence. Was it the alcohol? A fleeting moment of weakness? Or something deeper, something insidious I hadn't dared to see before? My mind spiraled, cycling through every possible explanation, every lie I might tell myself to dull the pain. But there was no escaping the truth. She'd betrayed me, and she hadn't even bothered to hide it. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at her unconscious form like a stranger in my own home. Eventually, the rage won. I grabbed a blanket from the armchair and tossed it over her. Not out of kindness, but because I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. Then, I picked up her phone again. My fingers hovered over the screen, my vision blurred by a haze of anger and disbelief. The texts, the photos, the lies. They were all right there, staring back at me, daring me to do something about them. As I stood there, the pieces of my life falling apart around me, I realized one thing. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a choice, a deliberate, selfish choice she had made over and over again. I wasn't going to sit by and let her get away with it. The blanket I'd thrown over Kimberly only half covered her, but it didn't matter. It wasn't to spare her shame, she had none. It was for me. I couldn't look at her lying there, exposed, with Chris's messages still glowing on her phone, without my chest tightening and my fists clenching. I didn't wait. I couldn't. The buzzing in my ears drowned out rational thought. My hand reached out, grabbed the couch cushion under her head, and yanked it out from under her. She jolted awake, groaning in confusion as her head smacked the armrest. "What the hell?" she slurred, squinting at me. "Wake up," I snapped, my voice cold and sharp. "We need to talk." Kimberly blinked, her foggy eyes struggling to focus on me. She sat up slowly, dragging the blanket around herself. "What's your problem?" she muttered, her words sluggish. "It's late." I grabbed her phone off the couch and held it up, my knuckles white as I gripped it. "Chris says hi." Her entire body froze. The haze of alcohol and exhaustion in her expression cleared instantly, replaced by wide-eyed panic. What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, where it landed with a loud clatter. "Don't play dumb, Kimberly. I saw the messages. The photos. Everything." Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, but I slapped it away before she could grab it. "No. You don't get to hide now. Start talking." "Wait," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "I can explain." "Explain." I barked, my voice cutting through her excuses like a blade. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back. Sending pictures to some guy? Sleeping with him while I'm here, working my ass off to give us a good life? Go on. I'm all ears." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face flushed crimson as her gaze darted around the room, like she was searching for an escape. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally said, her voice cracking. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. "Kimberly, you don't accidentally send pictures of yourself to someone else. You don't accidentally sneak off to meet him. And you sure as hell don't accidentally sleep with him." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Not now. It wasn't like that," she said, her voice barely audible. "Then tell me how it was," I demanded. "Tell me how you ended up drunk, naked, and texting another man while I was sitting here, trusting you." Her hands gripped the edge of the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. I wasn't happy," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words hit me like a slap to the face. "You weren't happy," I repeated, my voice rising. "And this is how you deal with it. By screwing someone else." "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're always working, always busy." I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to you anymore. My chest tightened, the anger boiling beneath my skin threatening to spill over. "So this is my fault," I snapped. "Because I was working to provide for us? Because I trusted you to be honest with me?" Her head dropped, her hair falling in front of her face. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice muffled. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, incredulous. "Kimberly, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. Do you even realize what you've done?" She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face a mix of guilt and desperation. "I'll fix it," she said, her voice shaky. "I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But her words rang hollow. There was no sincerity in her eyes, only panic. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. "Don't bother," I said, my voice cold and final. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, reaching for me. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling or something. Just don't give up on us." I stepped back, her outstretched hand hanging in the air between us. "There is no us, Kimberly. Not anymore. You made sure of that." Her shoulders sagged, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. But I couldn't feel anything for her. Not pity, not empathy. Just a hollow ache where my love for her had been. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I packed a bag, the weight of what I'd just done pressed down on me. But it wasn't regret. It was finality. When I returned to the living room, Kimberly was still on the couch, her sobs quieter now, her head buried in her knees. I set her phone on the coffee table, the messages still open on the screen. "Here," I said. "You might want to let Chris know you're available. Permanently." She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red. "You're really leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I said simply. "And I'm not coming back." As I walked out the door, suitcase in hand, I didn't look back. Kimberly's cries followed me into the night, but they were nothing more than background noise. This wasn't the end of my story, just the end of hers in it. I didn't look back that night. The front door closed behind me with a quiet finality, but as I drove away, my chest burned with the weight of everything I was leaving behind. The house, the life we built together, the years I thought were real, it was all crumbling to ash, and I had no choice but to let it fall. Kimberly's face haunted me the most. Not the way she looked lying on the couch, careless and exposed, but the way her expression shifted when I confronted her. That flicker of guilt, panic, and, beneath it all, self-preservation. She wasn't crying because she regretted hurting me. She was crying because she got caught. I stayed at a motel that night, the kind of place you pick because you can pay in cash and no one asks questions. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Kimberly hadn't called or texted. Maybe she was too embarrassed, or maybe she thought I just needed space. Either way, the silence was deafening. The temptation to text her myself was there, gnawing at the back of my mind. I wanted answers. Why, Kimberly? When did it start? Was anything we had ever real? But deep down, I knew I wouldn't get the answers I wanted. Any explanation she gave would be tainted by her selfishness. Instead, I scrolled through her messages again. I hadn't deleted them. Not yet. The texts between her and Chris were like a poison I couldn't stop tasting. Each word was another wound, another reminder of how far she'd fallen. Still can't get the taste of you off my lips. Wish I was the one putting you to bed tonight. I should have stopped reading, but I couldn't. Not yet. And then I saw it. A reservation confirmation for a hotel. The date was last Friday, the same night she'd told me she was working late. The message included the address, the room number, even a receipt for the dinner they'd shared. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. The image in my mind was too vivid. Kimberly laughing at another man's jokes, her hand brushing his across the table, her eyes filled with the kind of fire she hadn't shown me in years. I slammed the phone down on the nightstand, my pulse pounding in my ears. The next day, I went back to the house. It wasn't about reconciliation or second chances. I just needed to pack my things. Kimberly wasn't home, thank God, and I moved through the house quickly, grabbing the essentials. Clothes, important documents, my guitar. The rest could wait. But as I stood in our bedroom, looking at the bed we used to share, I felt a bitter wave of anger. How many lies had been told in this room? How many nights had she come home from seeing him and crawled into this bed like nothing had happened? I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving her world, her lies, her version of me. That afternoon, I sat across from a divorce lawyer named Vanessa. She was sharp, professional, and pulled no punches. As I laid everything out for her, the texts, the photos, the hotel receipt, her face remained impassive, though I could tell she was already formulating a strategy. "You've got plenty of leverage here," she said after I finished. "Infidelity is messy, but it works in your favor. My advice: be decisive. Take what's yours and walk away clean." "Clean?" I asked, my voice tinged with bitterness. "She didn't give me clean. Why should I?" Vanessa tilted her head, considering me carefully. "That's your choice. Just know that if you go for revenge, it has consequences. Sometimes cutting ties is the cleanest revenge of all." Her words stayed with me as I left her office, but the anger in my chest wasn't so easily extinguished. Kimberly had humiliated me, betrayed me, lied to me. Why shouldn't I make sure she felt the weight of her actions? That evening, after filing the divorce papers, I sat in my car outside the house and opened Kimberly's phone one last time. The group chat with her friends was still there, a cesspool of encouragement and complicity. "You deserve to have some fun, girl. Don't let him hold you back. Chris is so much better for you than Rob. Just be careful. You don't want Rob finding out." These were the same women who had toasted at our wedding, smiling as they told me how lucky Kimberly was to have me. Hypocrites. The anger boiled over, but this time, it wasn't reckless. It was cold, calculated. I forwarded the texts and photos to her group chat. No message, just the evidence. Let them see what their encouragement had led to. Then I forwarded everything to her parents. Her mother adored me, had always treated me like a son. I doubted she'd be as forgiving as Kimberly hoped. Finally, I sent the messages to Chris. He deserved to see the fallout of what he'd helped create. The aftermath didn't take long to unfold. By the end of the week, mutual friends began reaching out with updates I didn't ask for. Kimberly's friends had turned on her, distancing themselves now that the truth was out in the open. Her parents were furious, the kind of angry that didn't fade quickly. And Chris. He ghosted her entirely. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. What I felt was closure. Kimberly had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. That night, I stood in my nearly empty apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. The silence felt different now, not heavy or oppressive, but peaceful. Kimberly had been a part of my life for years, but now? She was just a memory, a scar, a chapter in a book I was finally ready to keep writing. I grabbed my phone and deleted her number, her texts, and every photo she had ever sent me. Then, I poured myself a drink, picked up my guitar, and sat on the balcony. The future wasn't clear, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The first week after leaving Kimberly felt like a storm had passed, but I was standing in the middle of its wreckage. The silence in my new apartment was almost too loud, and I found myself pacing the small space at night, staring at my phone more than I wanted to admit. She hadn't reached out. Not immediately, anyway. The woman who once filled my days with laughter and affection had become a ghost, haunting only in memory. I should have felt free, but the weight of what happened still clung to me. The pain of betrayal doesn't fade overnight. It lingers, digging into your mind in the quiet moments when there's nothing else to distract you. Every detail of Kimberly's lies replayed in my head on a loop. The texts, the photos, the hotel receipt. And, of course, the name that wouldn't stop echoing. Chris. But I had made a choice. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. Over the next few weeks, I forced myself to move forward. It wasn't easy, but the alternative, staying stuck in the past, wasn't an option. I threw myself into the divorce process, meeting regularly with Vanessa, my lawyer. She had a sharp wit and a no-nonsense attitude, but she also had a way of keeping things in perspective. Kimberly's regret doesn't matter, she told me during one meeting. What matters is that you walk away from this with what you deserve. A clean break. Nothing tying you down. Her words hit harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt tethered to Kimberly, not just through love, but through obligation. I'd built my life around her, and now I was learning how to untangle myself from that web. The divorce moved quickly, thanks in part to the evidence I had. Kimberly didn't contest anything. She signed every document without hesitation, probably hoping to end the embarrassment as quickly as possible. And it wasn't just the legal process that was moving forward. Kimberly's reputation was falling apart in the background. I'd exposed the truth, and while I hadn't included her friends in my revenge, word spread fast. Her parents were devastated. Her co-workers whispered behind her back, and Chris? He had disappeared the moment the fallout began. Despite everything, I avoided the temptation to dig into her life. I didn't want to know how she was handling it. I didn't care if she regretted it or if she was drowning in guilt. Kimberly's life was her mess to clean up now. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own. I joined a gym for the first time in years. At first, it was just to release the anger that still simmered under the surface. But soon, it became a part of my routine, something I looked forward to. The weights, the punching bag, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the treadmill, it was like therapy in motion. I started reconnecting with old friends, too. People I'd drifted away from during my marriage, either because of Kimberly or because I'd been too focused on work. They welcomed me back without hesitation, reminding me what it felt like to have real, meaningful connections. And then there was music. My guitar, which had been gathering dust for years, became my refuge. I started writing songs again, raw, emotional pieces that poured out everything I couldn't say aloud. One night, I signed up for an open mic at a small coffee shop near my apartment. Standing on that stage, my guitar in my hands, I poured my heart into every chord and lyric. The audience's applause was unexpected but welcome, a reminder that I could turn pain into something beautiful. Kimberly eventually tried to reach out. The first text came about a month after I left. "Rob, I know I messed up. I need to talk to you. Please." I ignored it. A week later, another text arrived. "I'm sorry for everything. I can't take it back, but I want you to know how much I regret it. Can we meet? Just once?" Regret. It was a funny word. Regret didn't erase the nights she spent with Chris, the lies she told, or the damage she caused. Regret didn't undo the fact that she'd burned our marriage to the ground without a second thought. Still, I couldn't deny the small pang I felt reading her words. Not sympathy, exactly, but something close to pity. She had gambled everything we built together and lost. I didn't reply. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. The house sold quickly, and I used my portion of the money to find a new place, a small but cozy apartment on the edge of the city. I kept the decor minimal, refusing to let my new space become cluttered with reminders of my past. Everything about this apartment was mine. No memories of Kimberly, no lingering traces of her touch. One evening, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I found an old photo album tucked between some books. Inside were pictures of Kimberly and me from our early days, laughing at the beach, dancing at a friend's wedding, cuddling on the couch in our first apartment. For a moment, I felt a pang of grief for what we had been. Those moments were real, weren't they? Or had they been as hollow as the promises she made? I stared at the album for a long time before closing it and placing it in a box marked storage. Letting go didn't mean erasing the past. It meant accepting it for what it was and refusing to let it control my future. In time, I started to feel lighter. The anger that had burned so fiercely in the beginning was now a distant ember. The pain didn't feel sharp anymore. It was just there, like a dull ache that reminded me of where I'd been and how far I'd come. I wasn't ready to date again, but I wasn't bitter about love either. I knew I would trust someone again, someday. But for now, I was content with the quiet, with the freedom of living life on my terms. One night, I sat on my balcony with my guitar, the city lights stretching out before me. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. Kimberly's betrayal had broken me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. But it had also forced me to rebuild, to become someone stronger, more self-assured, and more alive. And as I strummed the first chords of a new song, I realized something. I wasn't writing about her anymore. I was writing about me. The months turned into a year. Each passing day pulled me further from the wreckage Kimberly had left behind and closer to a version of myself I barely recognized. Stronger, more self-assured, and less willing to compromise for anything or anyone that didn't serve my peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. My mornings were no longer filled with questions about what I had done wrong or why I hadn't seen the signs. I'd stopped measuring my self-worth against someone else's broken promises. Therapy had helped. Paul had a way of cutting through my bitterness, teaching me to recognize that while Kimberly's betrayal had been devastating, it wasn't the defining moment of my life. "She's just a chapter, Rob," he'd said once. "Not the whole story. And now, you're writing the rest of it." And that's exactly what I was doing. I leaned into my hobbies more than ever. Music became my outlet, a language for everything I couldn't say aloud. I started performing at open mics around the city, stepping onto small stages with my guitar slung over my shoulder, pouring my pain, anger, and eventual healing into every chord. The first time I sang one of my original songs, about betrayal, survival, and reclaiming yourself, I wasn't sure how the audience would react. But when I finished, the applause felt like validation, a reminder that my pain wasn't something to hide. It wasn't just music, either. I started traveling, something Kimberly had always found excuses to avoid. Small trips at first, weekend getaways to nearby towns, hiking trips in the mountains, but they grew bolder as my confidence returned. I booked a solo trip to Italy, wandering cobblestone streets and tasting wine in sunlit vineyards. For the first time, I wasn't tethered to anyone else's schedule, preferences, or needs. The freedom was intoxicating. Kimberly tried to reach out a few more times after that first text. Her messages ranged from guilty apologies to tentative olive branches, and eventually to bitter accusations when I didn't respond. "You're so cold, Rob. I know I messed up, but does that mean you have to hate me forever?" I didn't hate her. But I also didn't owe her a response. I didn't owe her anything. I blocked her number after the last message. That chapter of my life was closed, and I wasn't interested in revisiting it. One night, after finishing an open mic set at a small coffee shop, a woman approached me as I packed up my guitar. She had bright, curious eyes and a warm smile that made her seem approachable in a way Kimberly never had. "That was amazing," she said, gesturing toward the stage. "You have a way of making it feel personal, like you're telling a story." "Thanks," I said, surprised at how easily the words came. I wasn't used to compliments from strangers. "Do you write all your own songs?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Yeah," I said, slinging my guitar case over my shoulder. "They're mostly about things I've been through. Life, loss, starting over." Her smile grew, soft but understanding. "Well, you're really good at it. I'm Sarah, by the way." I shook her hand, feeling an unexpected spark of connection. "Rob." We didn't exchange numbers that night. It wasn't a movie moment where I fell headfirst into something new, forgetting the past. But it was a moment, a reminder that there were still good people in the world, still possibilities waiting for me. Over time, the wounds Kimberly had left began to feel less like gaping holes and more like scars. Faded, but still there. They didn't hurt anymore, but they reminded me of what I'd survived, of the lessons I'd learned. I learned to listen to my gut, to never ignore the small whispers of doubt. I learned that loyalty and trust are earned, not blindly given. And most importantly, I learned to put myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. One day, while cleaning out the last of the boxes from my old life, I found an envelope tucked into the corner of one. It was from Kimberly. A letter, written long before everything fell apart. "Rob, I know I don't always say it, but I love you. You work so hard for us, and I'm so grateful for everything you do. You're my rock, and I don't know what I'd do without you. Kimberly." I stared at the letter for a long moment before folding it back up and tossing it into the trash. Whatever feelings she'd had back then, they hadn't been strong enough to stop her from tearing us apart. Letting go didn't mean holding on to the good memories and ignoring the bad. It meant accepting both for what they were and choosing not to let either control my future. A year after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my small apartment, my guitar resting against the wall, my suitcase packed for another trip. I was heading to a coastal town in Greece this time, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting but had never made time for. The freedom was exhilarating. As I locked the door behind me, the thought crossed my mind. Would I ever trust someone again? Maybe. Maybe not. But I wasn't in a rush to find out. For now, I was enough. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough. Have you ever found peace after losing something you thought you couldn't live without? How did you move forward?